We are the YouTube channel A Blood Like Bruce. We wrote a story, a fictional story on the late great martial artist Bruce Lee and his new concept, new Jeet Kune Do concept that he was developing with the help of Junri, the Grandmaster of Taekwondo, and a Japanese ninjutsu Grandmaster, Masaki Hatsumi, 34th generation Grandmaster. That's fictional, okay? And he was developing it with them, and Masaki Hatsumi suggested to him, well, because Bruce Lee always taught himself, this was fact, as told by his friend and top student, Jeet Kune Do student, Dan Inosanto, that Bruce Lee thought himself invincible, untouchable, that nobody could lay a hand on him, right? He's too fast, and etc, etc. But one day they were sparring, as they usually did, and quite by chance, Dan Inosanto clipped Bruce Lee on the jaw, which sent him into shock, anger, that he managed to get through his defences and hit him on the jaw. He says it was just pure luck, pure chance. But Bruce Lee got really angry about it and started wailing down on him because he really thought himself invincible, untouchable. Obviously he wasn't. So in our fictional story, his butler, his friend, his car mechanic, because apparently, according to true articles, facts detailed by Chuck Norris and his student Bob Wall, that Bruce Lee was not a great driver. He had a sports car, he couldn't handle it, and he drove up on the curb, nearly ran them down one day, and says, hey guys, come for a ride. And so they made excuses. I can't, Bruce. Chuck Norris says, I can't, Bruce, I've got a class to teach. And Bob Wall said something like, well, I can't, I've got to take my grandmother shopping or something, right? Because they knew that how bad a driver he was. And then Steve McQueen took him in his sports car down a motorway and just accelerated, put his foot down hard on the accelerator. It was scared the hell out of Bruce Lee. He was hiding, cowering down underneath the dashboard, saying, McQueen, swearing at him, all that sort of stuff. You're a madman, you could have killed us, all that sort of stuff. He just chuckled, apparently, because Steve McQueen was a professional car racer, etc, etc, right? So it scared the crap out of Bruce Lee. So this guy, obviously, because he's too heavy-footed on the accelerator, the clutch, etc, in this fictional story, his butler, servant, friend, guy who was teaching Jeet Kune Do as well, had the skills to fix his car. And when Bruce Lee decided to move from his, we're not too sure if it's his house in Oakland or wherever his address was, which was turned into a restaurant, it failed, so apparently it was just left like that because some ghost hunters on YouTube, whatever, apparently went there, found it still intact. It's a bit of a mess of boxes and stuff like that. It was basically how it was left by this restaurant owner who just couldn't make any money from it and all this sort of stuff. So one of the house of Bruce Lee, apparently, like, this guy was gifted it to him from Bruce Lee, right? And Bruce Lee moved on for Linda and his family to somewhere else. So at the death of Bruce Lee, he was very, very depressed, very, very saddened. He lost his teacher, his best friend, etc, etc. So he just couldn't handle living there anymore. And in the fictional story, he approaches Linda Lee and her daughter at the time, way after Brandon had died, and Linda was doing okay. Like, she's not an actress, right? She has starred in Bruce Lee's movie Enter the Dragon, supposedly as one of those drug addicts on the heroin or whatever it was, when Jim Kelly gets beaten up by Han, the henchman, right? for supposedly walking around at night, you know, and his guards got beaten up. He wouldn't give him that information. He wanted to leave the island. You know, the scene from Into the Drink. So this guy is depressed. He confronts them and all that because he come up with this theory that the first Hong Kong death certificate, when Bruce Lee was actually taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital and checked over, and he died on arrival or something like that. It was done by this certain doctor. Okay, but somebody later on who may have remarried Linda Lee Emery, not too sure which one it was, Tom Bleecker or something like that. And then John Little, the author, had access to all of Bruce Lee's notes and stuff like that. And somebody found that he was in debt, but he had these three $10,000 life insurance policies. But Linda couldn't cash in on them because of the autopsy saying that he died due to overuse of hashish. Supposedly, Robert Baker, the actor who played the Russian karate man on Fist of Fury, you know, when it broke the boards and stuff like that, impressed the Japanese. Well, he was supposedly smuggling it. This is the information we found online, etc. He was smuggling it in, and also these weapons which Bruce Lee had on his belt buckle to protect himself. You know, extra protection sort of thing. And when Bruce Lee collapsed and he was examined by his doctor at one point, the doctor says, oh, he got a body of an 18-year-old, etc., etc., but stop doing this hashish because it has this little bug on it, and you know, when you puff on that stuff, it, you know, it does something to it, adds some, it's dangerous, you know, it's toxic, all this sort of stuff. This is from the information we found online. So our fictional story is based around the fact, but we've added fiction, so it's factitional, right? So this guy gets depressed. His Chinese friend gets depressed, and he's thinking. He just comes up with this theory, you know, like for this evidence that he's looked at. So he approaches Linda and says, "Hey, you know, you've possibly done some sort of fraud here, right? Because there's the first certificate, and then, there's a second certificate stating that he died of cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, allergic reaction to a pill that." Yeah, he complained of a headache at Betty Ting Pei's place. So she gave him this analgesic, whatever, and he lay down and he wouldn't wake up. So she rang movie producer, director Raymond Chow, and a couple of other doctors came along and examined him and said, "Oh, you need to get into the hospital real quick. You know, there's something seriously wrong with him. He won't wake up." So he got shipped off by the ambulance to Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Hong Kong, then examined, and he died on arrival, as we just earlier mentioned. And then the autopsy, the doctor gave the result of how he died, and he put down there too much use of this hashish. So, as most life insurance companies have these policies, if you're obese, you're an alcoholic, or you use illicit or illegal drugs, and they find out, you know, through a doctor's report or whatever, then they won't pay out. So this was the case with these three $10,000 policies of Bruce Lee, right? Life insurance policies. She couldn't get the money. So she supposedly had a doctor friend who then said to her, okay, because she had I think maybe Shannon was still young, being the youngest child of Bruce and Linda, right? Something like that. At that point, she needed the money because she's not a famous actress, etc., etc. So she's dependent on some sort of income, right, to feed those two children. So he says, "Well, I'll go to Hong Kong and convince this guy to change it to, you know, something else." So he flies there apparently and tries to convince this doctor, and she says, "No, no, no. What I've put on that certificate is final. That's it. I'm not changing it." She says, "Oh yeah, but," and he kept getting at him until he finally buckled and says, "Okay, so there's a second copy." So he goes back to America with this copy, right? This US doctor friend of Linda's, and shows it to her, right? And she takes it. Let's say she takes it to this life insurance company, and they pay her out the three life insurance policies, right? $10,000 or more each. Yeah. So she's home and hose, and then they come up with this idea he's telling her, well, then you come up with this idea, Linda, right? You and Shannon to have this museum, etc. You're feeding off the fans, okay? The popularity. I mean, you could throw a nonsensical book at them and they'll buy it. You know, it'll sell in the thousands, the millions perhaps, etc., etc. You know, so you're home and hose, you're making money, right? Because money, you're $10,000, like you got $30,000. It's not going to last if you're not an actress or you've got some sort of professional income or income coming in on a regular basis, right? Okay, so they're like, well, we don't appreciate that. This is factitional, right? It's not fact. It's part of our fictional story, our idea, our theory of what perhaps went down. They say, we don't want to know you anymore, okay? You know, because you're making accusations that we're into this fraudulent activity or this sort of stuff, you know, and they just, you know, we don't want to see you anymore. So he got even more depressed, and he's sitting in his house and he thought, well, what can I do? So this Chinese man came across him and says, wow, you know, this is Bruce Lee's former house, you know, you owned it, I'll buy it off you for say $100,000 or whatever. And so this guy tries to turn it into a restaurant or whatever, a museum, and it fails, right? So it's left, and then these ghost hunters later on, you see it on YouTube somewhere, they go there and they check it out, they find it, check it out, and it's still pretty much intact. So he decides, stuff this, I've got to get out of this, it's too depressing, I've got to get out of this, get away, right? So he catches a ride to so far to these crossroads, he gets out and he walks the desert, this desert road for hours, and this other guy picks him up, this European man, American man, you know, he's got a car business, but it was picked up, it was fixing cars for corporations or this sort of stuff, but he only had so much skill in it, you know, and it started to fail a bit because he couldn't, there was like money back guarantee, if I can't fix your vehicle, well, you know, there's no charge or that sort of stuff. So he sort of stuck there. He started off making money until he got to that point, right? And he's talking to this man. We had a certain name for him. We can't remember what it was in the story. We've done videos on it, whatever. Just can't remember the heck what the hell his name was. So this guy, he's like, you know, pretty skilled in this concept of this new Jeet Kune Do. He's the only one that really knows this new development of it, right? The other students weren't introduced to it, right? Because Bruce Lee was doing it from home. Because he closed down all the schools. He felt, well, nobody's, what the hell's going on? Nobody can really, they're not like me. You know, it's like half of them can't even turn their wrist, you know, all this sort of stuff. He just, well, you know, I don't want to have these schools open anymore. I just concentrate on my movie work, you know, etc., etc., which is actually fact. If you look, you do the research, that the reason why he closed them down, according to Dan Inosanto and his other students, right, his friends, whatever. So this guy gets picked up, and this guy says, "Oh, okay. So what do you do?" And he says, "Oh, we're from etc." Ask usual questions. He says, "Oh, I left where I was living. I had a falling out, sold my house, whatever." And he says, "Oh, where are you going to now?" He says, "I'm just basically going. You know, wherever I end up, I end up." He says, "Well, what skills have you got?" And all that sort of stuff. He goes, "Oh, I was a hired butler and mechanic for this person." He didn't name Bruce Lee, and he didn't want, you know, people to know that he was tied to Bruce Lee. So this guy goes, "Oh, okay, so you got car mechanic skills, all that stuff." He says, yeah. So he goes, "Oh, well, you know, I've got a spare room at my house, or maybe we could do set up a business together, 60-40, because he's already got his business running, right, but he's just failing in certain areas. He's got a son, he's got a wife, a son that's obese, you know, they're not like non-caring parents or ignorant or anything like that. It's just he's got something wrong with his gallbladder or something like that, you know, whatever that causes to make them obese. It's not that they, you know, feed them fatty food and all that sort of stuff. No way, right? They eat healthy, but it just doesn't seem to work. So he goes, "Oh, okay." So he goes to this person's house. He sees, he's introduced to his wife, this guy's wife. She's got a garage, all these cars and all that sort of stuff. He says, "Yeah, you can work with me. You can stay at the spare outside room, whatever, a batch at the back, and we'll work together and we'll go 60-40. We'll talk about all that sort of stuff, right? And then his son comes home and he's like crying, upset and all that because he's obese. People are picking on him all day, every day at middle school and through to high school, right? And he feels sorry for this kid, right? Because he was picked on as a nerdy geek, skinny geek, until he, associated with Bruce Lee, a friend of Bruce Lee's, going to the same school, St. Xavier, whatever, introduced him to Bruce Lee, and then they got on, and then, eventually Bruce Lee comes up with this new Jeet Kune Do concept, how to be untouchable, become invisible. It's like all these different concepts, and he was developing it, but unfortunately he passed in July 1973. So this guy had all these skills, so he basically started developing it, as Bruce Lee was developing it, how Bruce Lee taught him, and then he was developing it with his ideas as well, because that's what Jeet Kune Do is, right? It's not a fixed style or a set or anything like that. It's something that just flows, right? Etc., etc., according to the Jeet Kune Do philosophy of Bruce Lee, etc., etc. So this guy's got quite skilled in it. He hasn't mastered it yet, so he's not going around saying, "I'm a master," all that sort of stuff. And Bruce Lee taught me all that sort of stuff. He's keeping it quiet because he just wants to leave that life because he's just so depressed and hurt by the differences he had when he confronted Linda Lee and Shannon Lee, etc. Remember, it's all fictional. It's factitional. It's not 100% true. Okay, it's part of our story. So this man takes him under his wing, and he basically helps this man to better his business. He says, well, this is what you should do, blah blah blah. So the money started picking up, and this guy was really happy with this guy. And this guy noticed that, this guy used to be pretty musty, but he's got a bit fat. He says, yeah, it's because we're working on this business, etc., etc. So haven't even been giving my wife much attention. Son a little bit, all that sort of stuff. So this Chinese guy says, okay, we'll work on that as well, because I'm really grateful that you picked me up and then offered me this and a place to stay and money. This guy actually had money, but he's not a person to say, yeah, well, I'm really rich and wealthy and I've got all this money more than you, bragging like that. He's very humble. So he befriends this boy, and he's sympathetic, empathetic to his problems of being bullied at school every day, all day, every day. It's driving the kid mad. So he starts to teach him this concept, but he's not telling him that it's a Jeet Kune Do from Bruce Lee or this sort of stuff. But it involves a lot of taunting, teasing, how Bruce Lee was, like tap you on the head, tap you at the back, all that sort of stuff. But it was like every time this guy was practicing, say for 3 to 6 months, he could never land a punch on this Chinese teacher, right? His Shifu, whatever. He says, "Come on, what are you doing? Is that all you got? Hit me!" All the Bruce Lee stuff. We've added that into the story. What the hell was that? Are you doing a charade or all the stuff off? We've looked at all the films like Enter the Dragon and with his instructing Lao and all this sort of stuff, right? Who supposedly that actor became the guy who created Scooby-Doo or something like that. We're not too sure, and that's just what we've heard, right? So yeah, he's taunting this guy for ages and ages. This guy's just getting really frustrated. He finally loses it, right? This kid loses it. He's like, well, I can't be bothered anymore because I can't hit you. I'll never ever hit you. This guy's encouraging him, you can. You just got to realise where you're going wrong, sort of thing, right? So he's teaching him, and this guy's losing weight, through this guy teaching him. And then one day, by chance, because he's saying to him, why are you thinking it should be just flowing? All the Bruce Lee stuff, right? So this guy's trying. He's getting really peed off. And then one day actually taps the guy on the chin. He says, wow, how did that feel? That's what he goes, what made you actually do it after all these months? He said, I just didn't think about it. I just flowed, it just happened. He goes, yeah, you finally got it, all this sort of stuff. So this guy is going to high school, college, whatever you call it in America, okay, and he's still getting picked on, but now that he's got the skill and he's lost a lot of weight, he's actually quite muscly. Still got some work to develop, different parts of his body. But these people hassle him and stuff like that. They've been hassling him since he was the fat kid, right? So he thinks, well, here's my revenge. I'll punch them over, all that sort of stuff. But then he starts to think, well, nah. And he sort of like ends up mucking around with them, taunting them, teasing them, just like the teacher taught him, right? Because he clicked onto the whole concept of it, this new concept, to be untouchable, to be invisible. Like they throw a punch, it's like you're not there. Right? Tap, tap on the head, a boot in the backside, all that sort of stuff. They just couldn't lay a hand on him. So this teacher says, okay, step 2 or level 2, 3, whatever, we've got to put you in a real situation. So he goes to he's also met this girl that like they invited to parties and they just treat her like crap, these people that taunt you, all this sort of stuff. They just invite her just for numbers, right, and just give her crap while she's there. This guy befriends her. She sees his body. Wow, I remember you're this big obese kid, and now you got this body like Bruce Lee. What have you been doing? So, I met this Chinese. We got this Chinese man staying at my house. And he's teaching me this martial arts, right? And she goes, oh, what's the name? And he goes, oh, I don't know. It's just a martial art, whatever. And things have been working out for me. So she goes, wow, because he shows her the new JKD concept, and she's like freaking out because she can't land the punch on him. He's taunting her as the teacher taunted him, all that sort of stuff, right? He's repeating the process. So he takes her there, and she starts to learn from this teacher, and she goes through the taunting process, the teasing process, and the ridicule and all this sort of stuff, until she realises what it was really all about, right? And she just doesn't think about it. She flows. She taps this guy on the chin like her new boyfriend did, right? After 6 months. She's actually like very, very intelligent. She picked up faster, right? Being a woman, etc. She seemed to pick it up faster. So one day the teacher says, well, how did you manage to, or what made you manage to hit me after 6 months? And she says, oh, I just didn't think about it. I just did it. She said, well, that's the whole concept of it, and she understood how to be untouchable, how to be invisible, that sort of stuff. So she says, okay, we'll put you on this other level, we have to take you out into this real scenario. We go to this nightclub. I know you guys are probably 16, 17, whatever, so you can't drink. You can have milkshakes, you have dancing, all that sort of stuff, but no alcohol, because it's illegal, it's against the law, blah, 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 whatever. Right? Okay, that's not the whole idea, to get you drunk and all that sort of stuff, right? Just go there for dancing, you guys have a good time, and I'll just, sit there, have a milkshake or something, maybe a beer, whatever, while you guys have fun. It's my treat for you, a night out, good students, whatever. So he goes in, there's this lady sitting there, she's a little bit obese and got big glasses, look a bit like Medea, and so he's sitting down with her, he starts talking to her, and they get on really well. But her ex-boyfriend, that just can't get it through his head that they don't go out anymore, comes up and goes, oh, who's this so-and-so, so-and-so, really, really rude, who's this dink, etc. What's she do with this guy? Are you, da-da-da-da, whatever. And she's like, look, go away, leave us alone, we're not an item anymore. He goes, oh, once mine, always mine, all this sort of arrogant crap, right? And this guy's supposed to be up-and-coming Muay Thai kickboxer or something like that, kickboxer or whatever. His mates are saying, wow, this guy, this little old Chinese guy or whatever, this guy will kick his butt, right? So this teacher's taunting him with that sort of stuff, and goes, no, you won't be able to touch me or this sort of stuff. It's just like egging this guy on. So this guy's like, well, let's go outside, and yes, I'll knock you around, yeah, I'll knock you up, yeah, blah blah blah, all this sort of stuff, all the threatening stuff. So he goes outside with this guy, and this guy's trying his hardest, and he's like panting and all that sort of stuff. After a while, he just can't lay a finger on this guy, this teacher, right? And he goes, oh, what's the problem? Your mates are saying that you're great kickboxer and all this stuff, up and coming, whatever, and you can't even land the punch on a little old man. And he just kept taunting him like that, until the guy just lost it, right? So, well, could you please stand still so I can hit you? Things like that. She said, what? So he basically proved himself untouchable, right? Invisible, no matter how much this guy tried. And then his mates tried to step in, and he just basically tied them up in knots. He didn't use punches on them and all that sort of stuff, or beat them up severely. He just taunting them, going around them. They throw a punch, he's right in front of them, they throw their best punch or their best kick or whatever, and he's behind them. That's how fast he moves. And like this guy, G double E, and his little girlfriend, they're like amazed, wow, But G knows, well, this is the school that I've learned, so this is the school she's learning, etc., etc. So we'll end up like that as well, as skilled as that. But again, it's all still being developed. You have to practice to make it perfect, etc., etc. So he says, well, okay, you can't hit me, so how about you hit one of my students? And this guy goes, oh yeah, I'll kick their ass, or that sort of stuff, right? So he goes, looks at both of them, G and this girlfriend of his, and he goes, no, not the guy, you're going to fight this woman. He goes, slap her silly, right? And you really think so? You really think you can? Got the skills? He goes, yeah, I'm this, I'm that, bragging. And it's basically the same for him. You can't touch her, you can't lay a hand on her, you can't lay a foot on her. She's just all over the place, tapping him on the head, teasing him, taunting him, and OG is just looking on and laughing, because they both know they got these skills that no one else has. So no matter how much he tries, and he's out of breath and all this sort of stuff, panting, whatever, he just can't lay a finger on him. No matter what he does, tricky moves, deceptive moves, whatever, he just can't land a punch. So he gets all frustrated and he says, well, he asks the girl, can you just stay still so I can hit you? That sort of thing. And she keeps taunting and all that stuff. He eventually gets all upset and runs off. So this teacher would eventually teach the ex-girlfriend of that guy, she's a beast or whatever, has some problems, to defend herself and all that sort of stuff. So the story carries on like that, up until they have children of their own. The teacher obviously gets older. These two get together because they're meant for each other, etc., etc., according to the story, right? She actually wanted to break away from him because, being a young male, he had these tendencies and he wanted to sleep with her, etc. But she thought, well, that's all you want me for, get lost, right? But then he says, no, we don't have to do it that way. Because part of this teaching of this Chinese guy was like to be a better man. Don't use women as objects. They're not sex toys, they're not sex dolls or punch bags or anything like that. Treat them a better way. So this guy says, okay, we don't have to do that. We can wait. If you want to wait till marriage. Well, she was enticing him as well, because everything felt good, but he got to a certain point and she didn't like the idea of it. She froze. So he says, we don't have to do that. We can, do something else. We can save that later for marriage later on. So eventually they did get married, they did have children, and they taught them the same JKD concept as the master had taught them, right? And then these people were like these kids were like really grateful that these parents had taught them that. But somewhere along the way they eventually figured out, hey, all these concepts are Bruce Lee. You must have had some sort of association with Bruce Lee. What happened? And he ends up, because he didn't want to tell anybody, he just wanted to live a new life. So he eventually reveals it to them. I was this mechanic. He was doing this new concept of Jeet Kune Do, etc., etc. And that's what I've been teaching you. And that's why, Bruce Lee, if you look at his movies, which they did, he taunts the people a lot. He taunts them, teases them, like Lao on Enter the Dragon. What was that? Hit me. What are you doing? All that taunting stuff. Yeah, well, that's basically what he incorporated into the new JKD concept that he's developing up until his death. So, okay, get back to the story here. We asked a certain AI, did it know The original name of the doctor who first examined Bruce Lee on his immediate delivery to St. Mary's Hong Kong Hospital on the night of July 20, 1973. That was on the original autopsy report and where it was dated, issued to his wife and family. Because we did a lot of videos on our channel, Body Like Bruce, and one person in particular said, hey, I'm really happy that you're using my articles, etc., for your channel at Body Like Bruce. So we thought, oh, it's on his video, YouTube channel, but there's nothing new. Now, hang on, this guy's saying this and he's not even doing it. But then we went back to the message that he commented us, right? It's on his post. So he's got all these articles. We're like, wow. So what we did, we found, doing that, we found on Internet Archive this copy of a birth certificate. Okay, American Foreign Service final report of the death of an American citizen. American Consulate General, Hong Kong, BCC, October 10, 1973. Name in full, Bruce Lee. All this in the background here is faded out for some reason. Occupation, film actor, native. This has all been blocked out. Born at California, November 27, 1940. Last known address in the United States, 2551 Ross Comare Road, Los Angeles, California, 90024. Date of death, July 20, 1973 at 11 o'clock. 11:30. It's got the hours here, 2300 minutes 30. Age 32 years and 8 months. Place of death, Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Kowloon, Hong Kong, BCC. Cause of death, acute cerebral edema due to hypersensitivity. Death by misadventure, unanimous. As and it's got all this other information. Evidenced by entry number 2543 KPR in the Register of Deaths in the Colony of Hong Kong. It's probably British owned before it became Chinese owned again, right? Way back in the 70s. Disposition of the remains, embalmed and shipped on July 26, 1973 by air to Butterworth Mortuary, 300 East Pine Street, Seattle, Washington, USA. Local law as to disinterring remains, non-applicable. Supposedly, Bruce Lee, portions of Bruce Lee's brain were sent to medical practitioners or professionals in New Zealand to examine it and so forth. Disposition of the effects and possession of the widow, Mrs. Linda Lee. Like all his possessions that he had on him, glasses, passport, whatever, got sent back to her, right? Okay, so they're all in custody of her. Copy of the report was eventually sent to her at Cumberland Road, Kowloon. She's a widow, his widow, 10th of 10th, 73. So that's like 3 months later. August, September, October, roughly. Okay. She was residing abroad with relatives as follows, and there's her address there. The information, this has all been typed out, has been placed under file PB9, etc. Remarks, US passport, and so forth. And a copy of a Hong Kong death certificate could be obtained by writing to the Births and Deaths Registrar General's Department, Hong Kong, referring to entry number, continue on reverse if necessary. Harold T. Christie, Consul of the United States of America. So we looked at this, we thought, hang on, this is a birth certificate and this guy signed it. Okay, so we were a bit suspicious there. Okay, it took 3 months before it got sent, all this sort of stuff. So we thought, yeah, okay, in our story, we had this theory that this Linda Lee couldn't get his 3 life insurance policies because he had died of what using too much hashish, etc., supposedly, right? It was the first autopsy report from St. Elizabeth's, but then there's this one here which says he died of that allergic reaction to a painkiller, Aquagesic or analgesic, whatever it was, he got from Betty Tung Pays when he complained of a headache. So we're thinking, well, if this certain person, we don't know which one it is, Bleecker, Tom Bleecker, or John Little, whoever, that went through his notes, his diaries, etc., and found that Bruce Lee was in debt, had all his medical bills or something like that, but he had these 3 life insurance policies, but when he and Linda went to cash them, because she had children, etc., that she needed to feed, she's not a great actress and all this sort of stuff, her money could run out and she's stuck, right? So this company says no, because supposedly, according to this autopsy, Bruce Lee died of using illegal hashish, drugs or that sort of stuff, so we're not paying out. Yeah, so this medical doctor friend of hers, she came across whatever, supposedly said, okay, I'll go to Hong Kong, get this this doctor to change it, change it to something else. So he goes there and he tries to convince this doctor that he finalised this autopsy report, and he said, no, I'm not going to change it. That's what he died of. He had a gut full of hashish, etc., etc., and that's what killed him because it's toxic, etc. This guy says, no, we need to change it. Probably gave the reason why. His widow needs the money to support the kids. If she goes broke, well, she's stuffed, right? That sort of stuff. So, have a heart. He goes, no. What I've put is what I've put, and that's the way it's going to stay. So this guy worked on him. Don't know if he bribed him or whatever. There's always that possibility. So he eventually changes it. This guy, happy, goes back to America with this new autopsy report, presents it to Linda, but then takes it to this life insurance company, gets paid out on the 3 policies. Okay. So this is what this Chinese friend, butler, car mechanic of Bruce Lee picked up on, right? She no. He dies in Hong Kong. He dies at Betty. He suffers at Betty Ting Pei's place, right? The actress, femme fatale, whatever. He gets checked by Raymond Chow and 2 other doctors that he rang up, and then only got to ship him to the hospital real quick. But he dies on arrival. So this doctor does his autopsy and figures out he died of illegal substance use, right? And all this sort of stuff. So if you look at the footage, the actual real footage, in the reports that he actually went to this Queen Elizabeth's Hospital, all this sort of stuff got examined by that doctor there, who did an autopsy report there. But once this guy gets this new one, he goes back to America, presents it, etc., then they splash it all over the news. Okay, so then it becomes the story, this is how he died, right? Which is conflicting, because you've got modern doctors today who are saying, no, he didn't die of that. It's ridiculous that he died of a painkiller, allergic reaction to a painkiller, etc., etc. He possibly died of heat stroke because he had his sweat ducts under his armpits removed and all that sort of stuff, and he fainted in the studio recording, doing a voiceover for a movie, whatever, and all this sort of stuff. Or something else to do with slip disc, when he tried to put weights on his back and do exercises and he pulled the disc and all that sort of stuff. Something like that, but then you got this other guy that's supposedly written this book, who says no, he was a coke sniffer or this sort of stuff, snorter. He used cocaine, heroin, all this sort of stuff. Matthew Polly or somebody like that. And then someone else says, oh no, he actually died like this, and then someone else says, no, that's complete crap, he died like this. So there's all this conflict there. So we asked a certain AI, right, to help us out there, okay? Because we started off with a theory and then made a factitional story around the facts, added a lot of fiction in it of what possibly could have went down. Okay, so this website just dropped it. Okay, so I have to come back and talk about it more. This is part 1. We'll do part 2, because the trouble with this nightly Mozilla Firefox nightly, because it uses a lot of RAM or something like that, it just shuts down. So we've just lost the report, so I have to go and set it up again and carry on from there. So join us for part 2. If you like this part 1 of this fictional story, then give us a like, add your comments below the video, subscribe, don't forget to subscribe, click that subscribe button, and we'll get back to you on your comments, and then go share this video with all your family, friends and others. See you on part 2.